What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today we'll be going over the running backs I'd be trading for underway this week. I was going to touch on what Derrick Henry owners should be doing, but I have to record this before the trade deadline's over, and so I'm going to reserve a full take for that as part of the video that goes out on Fridays, the running back start sit video, when we talk about the Titans. That's when I'll touch on the situation. But in general, right now, all they've done is sign Adrian Peterson, but they could sign another running back. They could trade for someone, and since I don't know that, I don't want to give a full take and just waste your time if something else happens. Obviously, he's the number one waiver claim this week. You probably should have added him before waivers even processed. If you had the ability to do that in your league, not every league allows you to do that, but you should have done that beforehand. But yeah, he's worth just obviously the number one claim, a ton of fab. Because he's probably going to be really, really good in fantasy if he's the only back they acquire. But again, we'll talk about that Friday as far as that situation is concerned, because I don't want to give a take if it's totally outdated. So we'll get to the running back position in a second. But first, of course, have to start things off as usual. The stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was through Sunday. Only 4 running backs had at least 100 carries and 25 receptions. Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, and I said, what of the running back? The answer is Leonard Fournette. Jake Pierce was the first to get that right on YouTube, and at Pierce821 was the first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat. Among wide receivers with at least 55 targets this season, who has the lowest catch rate? Okay, or catch percentage. Caught the fewest percentage of those targets. Let's talk about some running backs. So first, I want to start off with a note. If you are selling a running back right now, it is because of one of these three criteria has happened. You've either hit on a ton of them, so you've just gotten super lucky. Maybe you went running back heavy early and you've avoided a lot of these injuries, and you've just got 4 really good running backs, and you're like, I can't start all these guys every week. Then yes, you should absolutely be looking to target teams that need a running back because you're going to get huge value. That's one. The other one, maybe you have a stud, but you're kind of losing because you don't have enough depth. You're starting players that are really, really bad each week, and you just don't like your starting lineup, and so you want to break that stud into multiple starting options. That's scenario 2. Or maybe it's just part of a deal for another running back. So you're trading away a running back, but you're acquiring one as well, and so you're not losing at the position. If you don't hit any of those 3, you're thin at running back, but you hear me talk about a sell high, and so you just sell them for some random wide receiver, don't be doing that, right? You still got to be smart. You got to understand that there are not that many running backs that are getting points. So anyone getting points, even if they're getting lucky, are still getting points, and they're still going to be valuable. Only be trading them away if you kind of hit one of those criteria. But if you do, then here are some running backs that I would be selling high on right now. We've got Darrell Henderson, 1. He went off last week, obviously. Finished 3rd in half PPR, 5th in full PPR, and it was basically through 3 quarters, right? Because that game, it was a blowout. And then, of course, Houston comes back, but they don't bring Henderson back into the game. He was benched basically after 3 quarters because they were winning by 100. He's now up to the running back 11 in both formats, both half and full PPR this season. Now, last week, he was a buy low. After a hugely disappointing week against the Lions, a team that can't beat anyone, is getting crushed by running backs, he didn't perform that well just because the touchdowns happen to flow to other players. That's just going to happen even if a team scores a ton of points. Look at the Eagles. This last week, they dropped, 44 points, and Jalen Hurts didn't have a score. That's just going to happen. Touchdowns are random, and so we want to buy low in situations like that. And my point for trading for him was obviously you buy low in situations like that. And also, he's clearly the lead back on a lead offense after a down week. You just trade for players when that's the circumstance. And on average, he was going to do much better than that. This week, of course, he goes off. And so if you're someone that watched the video last week, trades for Henderson, sees him as a sell right now, you're like, what is happening? You're not the person that's trading Henderson, right? That's why sometimes I don't love these trade videos, is because they're very team specific. I'm talking to the people who have Henderson that also have other capable backs, or have people in their league that are just reaching out to them being like, I want Henderson really badly. I'll give you another great running back and this great wide receiver for Henderson. Those are the situations I'd be willing to sell Henderson on. It's not the people who acquired him last week and now want to flip him for slightly more value. If you traded for Henderson recently, Just accept the fact that you've got a really good running back, someone who has a stable floor, has a high ceiling. But I know a lot of people really want to acquire Henderson right now, and I want to pump the brakes a little bit on his upside. I know I said he's got a good ceiling, but understand that he's still not like a top 5 running back. He's not capable of the ceiling that guys like Eckler, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, obviously like Barkley and McCaffrey when they're healthy, Henry when he was healthy. People like that have a much higher ceiling because Henderson is much more of a early down back than we really think he is. He has one more reception than Kyle Juszczyk on the season. He has the same number of receptions as Christian McCaffrey through 4.5 games less. So McCaffrey's played 4.5 fewer games, same amount of receptions. Like Henderson does not get many receptions, and he only has one game over 17 carries, 0 over 90 rushing yards. So he's very touchdown dependent, very early down dependent. And you don't think about that with Henderson because he is a good receiving back. They just choose not to use him in that area a lot. So while he's a great running back, he's going to be very valuable this season. And if you traded for him, just keep him because he's going to be fine. But if you can afford to be selling high on a running back, he is the one of your grouping I would choose. So if you've got like 3 or 4 really good running backs, you want to flip one of them, Henderson's the one I would flip. Because I think after this last week, people are going to start thinking his upside is a little bit higher than it is. And so I would use that opportunity to try and get something really nice for him. I'd also use the opportunity to flip Boston Scott. If you happen to pick him up off waiver wires last week, of course, he scores the 2 touchdowns. The Eagles just stomp the Lions. I mean, that game was not even remotely competitive at any point. It might not seem like there's really a market out there for Boston Scott, but I mean, there will be, right? People are very, very desperate at the running back position right now, and we've seen this season a ton of running back rentals work out. A ton of starters go down, and someone comes in to back them up, even if it's only for a few games, and does really, really well in their place. And so that's what people are going to think Boston Scott is. This sort of game is not going to happen again. They might not score 5 total touchdowns in a game again this season, but if they do, they're not all coming on the ground to running backs. And despite all this happening, a beautiful game script, all of these touchdowns, Boston Scott, even scoring these 2 touchdowns, scored 18 full PPR points. That's not good. And he was running back 12 in full PPR. So he saw, like a 95th, 98th percentile ceiling game, just the perfect game flow. Scores the touchdowns, still was barely a running back 1. That is not someone that you want to keep as a rental for a few more weeks, right? This is not going to happen again. You've got to use this opportunity to try and trade him because I promise you there's someone in your league that needs to win now, right? Plenty of people have 0, 1, 2, maybe 3 wins on the season. They're in win now mode. Even if it's only a rental, they saw him do really well last week. They might want that going forward. And so I would use this to trade him. The last sell high I have today is James Conner. I've mentioned him a lot this season. He's up to 8 touchdowns now on the year, but you can't rely on him as part of a championship team. That's our goal with every single league, is to win a championship, right? You can't be relying on James Conner to win a championship. He has 5 receptions all season, 15 total touches the last 2 weeks combined. He's only played 30 and 37% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. He's just far too touchdown dependent for us to trust. And he's been on a really hot streak for touchdowns, but I mean, Kyler Murray is obviously a threat to score touchdowns, right? But Kyler doesn't have a rushing touchdown since week 3, and he had a rushing touchdown each of the first 3 weeks. The touchdown luck is eventually going to swing a little bit more into Chase Edmonds' favor, into Kyler Murray's favor, and there'll be, a string of games where maybe James Conner doesn't score for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. Well, he might only score like 4, 5, 6 fantasy points in those weeks because all of his value comes from touchdowns. Those aren't the players I want to hold on to while they're going off in the touchdown department. And so if you want to trade a running back away and you've got James Conner, he's absolutely one you should consider. And I know a lot of you are asking for who are comparable players to be trading for. I built the trade table on the website to answer that exact question. And I've said a million times that it's team specific. What do you need on your team? What does the person who needs James Conner have on their team? But if you just look at the trade chart, and look at your team and your opponent's team, all you have to do is find players who are very close in the value column to James Conner. It's very simple to do, put a lot of time into the table, so please just look at that. On to the buy lows, and I'm going to break this down into 3 tiers this week. Tier 1 is going to be anyone with 0, 1, or 2 losses. Tier 1 teams, that just makes sense. Those teams are probably making playoffs. Tier 2 teams, 3, 4, or 5 losses. And then Tier 3 teams, anyone with only 0, 1, or 2 wins. You can easily just think of that as really good teams, everyone in the middle, and then the really bad teams. So if you find yourself in Tier 1, I would suggest trading for Leonard Fournette, DeAndre Swift, Nick Chubb, and Dalvin Cook. Leonard Fournette and DeAndre Swift are the top buy lows this week, especially for higher end teams, but realistically anyone can trade for them, but especially for Tier 1 teams, that's who I would look to acquire. They were the running backs 36 and 42 in full PPR scoring this last week, and both of them have a lead upside to close the season. Fournette is a featured back on the highest scoring offense, or I guess the second highest scoring offense in the NFL, but you could argue will end up being the number 1 scoring offense in the NFL this season, while Swift is getting really elite usage on his own, even though it's a little bit tougher to diagnose that. You've heard me mention the importance of receptions for running backs many, many times this year and in previous years, but I think JM over at the 1 week season did a really good job of showing how that's the case with DeAndre Swift this last week. If you have never heard of the 1 week season, please check them out. It's a DFS site, but I think that their information can absolutely be applied to season long as well. I think JM does a really, really good job with that site. No, I'm not affiliated with them, but he did a really good job, and so I want to show on the screen one of his takes last week. It didn't work out, but of course you guys know, if you follow me, process. Process is the most important thing. It does not matter if this one outcome didn't work out in our favor. The process was sound, and it just makes sense for any running back going forward. You don't even have to apply it for Swift. You can do this math for anyone. So if you take away touchdowns, DeAndre Swift has scored 81.1 DraftKings points this year on 52 targets, while scoring 26.2 DraftKings points on 78 carries. And DraftKings points, that just means full PPR scoring. Said differently, each target has been worth 1.56 DraftKings points, and each carry is worth 0.34 DraftKings points. That means that every target is worth 4.5 carries. So using that math, if you just want to say what is DeAndre Swift's usage this season in terms of carries, it's 44.5 per game. That's how you should think about the value of targets. I don't really care if DeAndre Swift isn't getting that many carries or isn't doing that great on the ground on a per carry average. I care about those targets. That's how we hit spiked weeks, because DeAndre Swift is capable of having 8, 9, 10, 11 receptions in a game. Not even targets, receptions in a game. Now, he's not going to hit that every single week. Of course, we saw this last week. He does. But that was a little bit game script related. They didn't perform all that well. They performed horribly, actually. But on average, he's getting so much of a workload that this is why we're going out and we're getting people who have a pass-catching role, and it's why we're fading guys like James Conner. Because James Conner is getting barely any carries, no targets. It's all the touchdowns. But a guy like Swift is averaging so many targets per game that it's like he's having 44.5 carries per game. So DeAndre Swift is seeing just elite usage, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. The Lions also have one of the 5 easiest playoff schedules as far as the running back position is concerned, and that's at least using data, not counting this last week. I'll have updated numbers for that probably when you guys are watching this, but I don't expect it to change all that much. He's got a pretty easy playoff schedule, and so he's absolutely someone I'd be looking to acquire. After Swift, after Fournette, I'd also be looking at Chubb and Dalvin Cook, like I said before. Chubb, he had 56% snap share this last week, but that's going to go up as he gets closer to 100% healthy. He has number one overall running back upside while Hunt is out. Since we have these injuries to these other backs, he could be the number one running back rest of season because Hunt's going to miss so much time. And so he's very, very valuable, especially great guy to target after 7.9 full PPR points in his return. The underlying usage is going to be very, very strong. He's going to have a lot of upside. You're going to want him on your team. And then, of course, Dalvin Cook. This should be obvious. He's coming off 7.8 full PPR points, 0 receptions. That was the first game in his career that he played at least 25% of the snaps and did not have a reception. When we have these injuries to Henry, Barkley, Kamara, there's also a case to be made for Dalvin Cook to be the number one running back rest of season. That's who I have right now. And so if you're a tier 1 team, you have to be trading for someone who right now is ranked as the number one running back coming off 7.8 full PPR points, especially when they're considered a pass catching back. He's not going to be that bad, obviously, all season. He's clearly their featured back. He's someone you're really going to want on your team. If you're a tier 2 team, so anywhere from like 5-3 to 3-5, somewhere in that range, I think your top options are everyone I just mentioned, but then also add in J.Williams and Myles Gaskin. Everyone that I mentioned before is your top option, people that I would much prefer trading for, but your team might not be as strong, and so you might have to go a tier below. But these guys are also really good options. J.Williams has been on this list every single week, and he likely will be for the rest of the season. He's very cheap to acquire, and just like with Michael Carter, he's got a ton of upside if they ever start using him more. And I do believe he's talented enough where that's going to happen at some point this season. Then Myles Gaskin, he's coming off a disappointing week, but he still had 12 carries, 4 targets, 6 targets per game over the last 4 weeks. Ran around on 49% of dropbacks, which is a decent number. The results weren't there because they played in Buffalo and they only scored 1 touchdown as a team, I believe 11 total points. That's not going to happen every week. And he's got a pretty good playoff schedule. Jets, Saints, Titans. Obviously the Saints are tough, but like the Jets and the Titans are really good matchups. And especially, hey, week 1 of the fantasy playoffs, getting the Jets, that could be a really, really nice game for Gaskin. Could be the reason you advance into the semifinals. We're just trying to make our way towards the championship. And again, he's super cheap, right? These guys don't cost a lot for you to acquire, and I think their value will increase moving forward. Then finally, we've got the tier 3 teams, 0, 1, 2 wins. I've said this for a few weeks now, but I know some of you need some hope, so I'll mention it again. I was 2-7 through 9 weeks last season. I won 4 straight to close the season, had a lot of points for, so I won the tiebreaker, squeaked into the playoffs, finished in second place. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that, right? You'd like to try and make it into the playoffs easily, have a much stronger team, but I started off really bad because I was getting unlucky with the schedule, right? I was scoring a lot of points, but everyone was also scoring points against me. And so I know that's happening to a lot of you right now. There is hope, but understand that you don't want to have to win out from this point on because that's still very difficult to do. So you got to take a chance, right? You can't be trading for injured running backs. Don't be doing that. You have to be winning every single week. But every single player that I mentioned before are my favorite running backs to go after. Remember, it's like Dalvin Cook. And so not the 2 below. So Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, DeAndre Swift, and Leonard Fournette. That's who I'd go after. I would not be going after J.Williams. I would not be going after Myles Gaskin. You need studs right now. And for this tier, I would just expand it to any top 10 running back. So any running back that I have top 10 rest of the season, you should be able to figure out who that is. Just any elite running back that is not injured, you should be trading for, even if you think you're giving up too much. The most likely scenario here, if you're not just getting like absolutely screwed with like the points for, the most likely scenario is you don't have enough upside on your team. Like your team has a lot of solid players, but no one's posting like 35, and so you're finding it difficult to beat teams when they go off. And if that's the case, you just got to do something, right? You've got to try and acquire some stud that has the chance to score 30, 35 points and win you the week on their own. That's why we talked all offseason about players who have ceiling weeks. You need those ceiling weeks to win consistently because every single player has a floor of 0. And so you want the players who can spike for 30, 35, 40 points. That wins you weeks. You might just not have enough players who have that in the range of outcomes. And so remember the 4 I mentioned, Chubb, Cook, Swift, and Fournette, but then any running back 1 rest of season who has a high weekly ceiling, you probably need to go after, even if you're sending a ton of players for, think you're overpaying. One other thing I'll mention, I know this is a running back video, But I would say Darren Waller, he has been a major disappointment this season aside from week 1, he's been absolutely dreadful. He was injured a few weeks ago, but he's coming off by now, should be healthy. He'd be someone I'd also look at just because he plays tight end. There are very few tight ends that have any sort of ceiling, and he has the upside to score 30 points at the tight end position, which basically wins you the week unless the rest of your team was garbage. And so if you're looking for someone else to trade for, he'd be someone. And then maybe George Kittle. Obviously, he's been a disappointment as well because of his injury, but he should be returning. And obviously, he's George Kittle, right? Like, he might not have the ceiling we used to see from him just because the offense isn't as good and they're very run heavy, but he's still George Kittle. He could still go out there and have 10 for 150 and 2 touchdowns any week. And so he's very, very valuable, and he's probably cheaper to acquire now since he's had such a bad season. So those are the running backs and a few tight ends that I would be trading for this week, given what the current state of your team is. If you like the video, well, be sure to leave a like. And remember, you can always see my rest of season rankings and use them as a trade calculator to come up with your own trade examples on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.